found myself going to work, hating what I was doing. And honestly, Pamela, I thought there was something wrong with me.
Excellent journey, I must say, and it's very rare to see somebody getting very well paid and still being frustrated.
When I first got into the profession, I made lots of mistakes. I'd
Wow.
been asked to give that training at various stops along the way, even when I was an account executive. When I published my book, no one knew me from Adam. And then I attempted, and the attempt failed. Didn't give up that hope.
Hello from Bangalore, India. I'm your host, Pamela, and you're tuned into Transition Story. Join us as we listen into inspiring tales from our guests, glean valuable learnings, and take action to apply them to our daily lives.
Welcome to the show, Chris. It's such an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Delighted to be here. Nice to see you again.
Okay, lovely. So, Chris, let's start from the beginning. Enterprise architect roles are often seen as very well paying and fulfilling jobs. What went wrong in your case? Can you share your journey and how coaching helped you navigate through it?
I would be delighted to. When I first started my career, I was a software engineer. I very quickly learned model-based development, model-based design, got into enterprise architecture, and I really enjoyed the profession. And about 15 years into my career, I was a consultant working largely with the federal government here in the United States. Honestly, Pamela, making more money than I thought I'd ever make and doing exactly what I thought it was that I wanted to be doing. And yet I found myself waking up miserable almost every day. I found myself going to work, hating what I was doing. And honestly, Pamela, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought, what's wrong with you? You're making great money. You're married. You have kids. You've got a great job. You're doing exactly what you thought you wanted to do. And yet I was unhappy. And so I did. I looked for some help. This was back in roughly 2005.
Mhm.
So about 20 years ago. And I found a gentleman who runs a career counseling, coaching organization called Pathfinders. I'll give him a shout out. Pathfinders, I think, career designer. And anyway, I went through his program and took a number of tests and then had some consultations with him. And he said, Chris, there's nothing wrong with you at all. You just have another number of skills and talents that need an outlet. And they don't have an outlet in your current profession. And until you get an opportunity to use those skills and talents, you're going to be like a caged tiger pacing back and forth. And that's really how I felt. And it was that program that gave me the courage to take my chance at sales. I had sat through a number of software vendor presentations. So I was familiar with the individual who gave the technical presentation or the product demonstration. And I always thought to myself, gee, I bet I'd be good at that role. But there was a certain fear associated with getting into a sales role. But after I went through his program, that's really what gave me the courage to jump into pre-sales as we now know it. So I'll pause there. That's sort of a little bit of the background.
Excellent journey, I must say. And it's very rare to see somebody getting very well paid and still being frustrated. I'm sure there are people who can relate to this answer because not everybody wakes up very motivated to go back to the same job. And I'm sure most of us have some innate skills that just take some nudging in terms of a thinking partner, like you did with your coaching company that you enrolled for, and you were able to uncover a lot of talent that you had never tapped into before. So,
Yeah.
my follow up is SC role happened, the solution consulting role, and you were doing very well. You made it to the President's Club 5 years in a row. What changed and that triggered for you to look beyond what you were doing? Because I think this was your second step. You moved away from an enterprise architect role, got into solution consulting, assuming or probably discovering it scientifically through the coaching. This was the right thing that you should be doing to channelize your energy and your skills.
Yeah.
Then what
Yeah.
triggered the change?
Yeah. So it's a really interesting question. And before I even get there, there's an important part of the journey that I think is worth sharing because that will explain the next part and help answer the question. when I first got into pre-sales, I thought I was going to be brilliant because I could, as I like to say, I could move a mouse and talk at the same time. And I thought all there was to success in that in the pre-sales role was be smart, be an expert, and be good in front of an audience. I
Yes.
had no idea what it really meant to be a sales professional. I had no idea what it really meant to be a sales engineer. So the truth is, Pamela, when I first got into the profession, I made lots of mistakes. Even though I was an expert and I was good on my feet and good in front of an audience, I was actually not a very good sales engineer. And I made lots of mistakes, but I
That
figured
is
it
so
out.
brave of you to acknowledge that on a platform like this.
Well, and I think it's an important part of the story, and it's an important part of answering your question. Once I did start to figure things out, to your point, all of a sudden, within about 6 or 8 months, I became the number one SE in my particular line of business. And as you said, I made President's Club 5 years in a row. Then I, as many sales engineers do, I wanted to progress my career. And it seemed like the logical next step was management. So I moved into management. And by the way, I was never a particularly good manager. That's, it's just not necessarily my strongest skill. But the thing that I noticed of the team that I had inherited, many of them were making many of the same mistakes that I made when I first entered the pre-sales profession. They were all experts in their field. They were all incredibly effective knew the product inside out. They just didn't necessarily follow a sales process. And I recognized some of the mistakes that I had made and what I did to correct them. And this was in 2010. I literally created a training program for my team. And that really turned things around. In fact, over the next couple of years, we closed some of the biggest deals that company had ever seen. And in fact, the CEO came to me and said, I'd like you to start doing training for some other teams literally across the globe. And a couple years later, I decided I wanted the big money and I became an account executive. So I was actually an account executive for about 5 years and learned how difficult it is to walk into a room having people look at you as just the sales professional. And I
Mm.
was selling basically the same products, selling in the same industry, and I was still an expert. Yet now people questioned what I had to say because I'm now the salesperson. And so I learned what it meant to be on that side. I found myself in a product marketing and sales enablement role. And all along that journey, I had been asked to give that training that I had created for my team back in 2010. I'd
Wow.
been asked to give that training at various stops along the way, even when I was an account executive. And during that time, I really developed a passion for coaching, for teaching, for running workshops. And in fact, I had a number of people ask me along the way, have you ever thought about doing this professionally? Have you ever thought about writing a book? And so that's really when that sort of burning desire, that seed was planted for me to become a sales trainer and a coach. So I'll pause there to sort of let you sort of, digest that and see if that sort of at least answers the question, how did
It
I
does.
get to the next step?
It does. And in a very beautiful way, the way you narrated your journey and what I gathered so far, you had your first milestone where the coach helped you uncover your passion for doing something on the technical field, and you actually went and did product selling through your technical sales role, which was sales engineering. During that process, you discovered you wanted to stop people from doing the same mistakes which you made, and you started training them. So it is about your mindfulness and your awareness of noting down what you're good at. I think you got a lot of reciprocation as well from the leadership of the company that you did this for, that they acknowledged that this was a real good training because they were able to see tangible benefits in terms of large deals closing, which I think is a problem of every sales leader today in any product company, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to subscription business and an annual recurring revenue model. So,
Yeah.
and then training became a big passion. You tried your hands at account executive, something which I did not know during our offline conversation. And it's kind of a ready reckoner for many SCs who want to become A's. assuming that that job gives them more money. But as you said, which I want to repeat for our audience, when you walk into a room as a sales guy, you are not perceived as that trusted advisor that you
Not.
used to be when you are a sales engineer.
You're not. In fact, just the opposite. As I like to say, as a sales professional, we are, quote, guilty until proven innocent. And right? And customers, they just naturally tend to look at sales professionals with a touch of suspicion, understandably, because nobody likes to feel as though they're being sold to. So, and that was an important lesson for me on the journey, because as you know, I run sales training programs now, not only for sales engineers, but for sales engineers and account executives. And one of the messages that I deliver to all the sales engineers I work with now is, please do not underestimate the amount of pressure that the sales professional feels, that your account executive feels. And please don't underestimate how difficult it is to walk in a meeting, whereas the customer may be looking at you with enthusiasm and welcoming you because you're the expert.
Yeah.
They're more than likely looking at your sales counterpart with much more suspicion and skepticism. So I think it's important to have that empathy.
Yes, absolutely. Great point, Chris. Lovely journey so far. But there was a strong desire to start your own business. What went
Yes.
on your mind when you made that choice of choosing a franchisee to launch your business?
So, and I'm glad you brought up the franchise. So, as I said along the journey, I had been invited to give my training to a number of different teams, even though that wasn't necessarily my core responsibility. And I really found a passion for doing it. And just doing a little bit of research, the one thing that I knew was being a trainer within an organization, frankly, doesn't pay particularly well. It certainly doesn't pay as well as a sales professional or even a sales engineer in most cases. And I have 5 kids and lots of personal responsibilities and fiduciary responsibilities at home. So that was a big consideration. But at the same token, going out on my own and starting something and being an entrepreneur felt very, very scary. And so, and I think I shared this with you once. I thought I could sort of shortcut the process
Yes.
by just investing in a franchise. And I won't share what the franchise was in respect to them. Basically, I bought into a franchise that was supposed to be or positioned as a turnkey sales and business coaching franchise and opportunity. I'll share with your listeners. I spent about $80,000, and this is probably about a decade ago, maybe a little less than a decade ago, which at the time was a tremendous amount of money for me, and it was a complete and total failure. I thought that all I had to do was write a big check, and they were just going to teach me everything I needed to know, and leads were just going to come out of the ether. And I learned very quickly that whether it's a franchise or not, you still have to do all the hard work of being an entrepreneur. And here's the interesting thing. The one thing that they gave me was content and material, but the one thing I didn't need was content and material. I already had my own content material. What I needed was to learn how to do the hard work of
Yes.
marketing, prospecting, and selling and delivering and running a business. And I found out very, very quickly that that's not what I was, quote, buying into. And it took me about a year. For those of you who don't know anything about franchise, many franchises are very difficult to get out of. And it took me a year to get out of this franchise. And I give them the benefit, I give them a great deal of credit. They didn't have to let me out. I had signed a 10-year commitment, and they could have held me to a 10-year commitment. But they recognized that it just wasn't a good fit, and they gave me a year, and then they released me. But that was an incredibly valuable lesson for me, Pamela. So it was an
There is no
expensive
shortcut.
lesson, and here was the lesson. If I'm ever going to do this, I have to be myself. Running that business was targeting small local businesses. I had never spent any time being a small business owner, and I didn't know anything about that world. What did I know? I knew enterprise software.
Yes.
And I had to be my authentic self. If I was ever going to do this, it had to be in the space that I have spent my entire career working in and focused on. And so that being said, I honestly thought it was never going to happen because I tried, it failed. And then I thought, well, I really want to do this, but I don't know if it's ever going to happen.
I can totally relate to that because I myself am a failed entrepreneur. Of course, I didn't go the franchisee route, but I did make a lot of mistakes of taking some shortcuts and could not succeed as an entrepreneur and got back to the corporate world. So I can fully relate to your story. But I would like to acknowledge that it takes a lot of courage to talk about your failures with so much confidence, and it can only happen when you have learned a lot from that failure. So it does seem to me when I hear the story that you have learned so much from this failure, and hence you are quite a successful single owner business today. And I've experienced some of your trainings, so I can fully endorse the fact that what you teach in your trainings is equally powerful. And all of this experience that you just shared with our listeners reflects in how you coach the sales engineers and the account executives to build that relationship to be able to go and sell better and bigger. So my
Yeah.
follow-up is, of course, is the book. In the first place, why a book? I know you saw the SEs making mistakes, you designed a training program. Why a book came to your mind? And I'm sure it's not easy to write a book. What are the challenges you faced and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. Yeah. Really good questions. The book really, the story of the book really starts in, I want to say roughly November of 2017. I could have my date slightly off. I attended a sales conference in San Francisco. And by this time, I had moved. I mentioned that I got a role as a product marketing and sales enablement
Yes.
professional. I was running product marketing sales enablement for a small tech company based in New York City. I attended a sales conference in San Francisco. And as I sat there watching individual after individual, person after person take the stage, give his or her presentation, the common trend that I recognized is that almost all of them had published a book and then launched a business in some way, shape, or form related to the book that they published. And we're now running some sort of sales training, sales consulting, sales coaching business, marketing coaching business, something of that nature. In essence, they were doing exactly what it was that I thought I wanted to do. And I watched them thinking, if they can do it, I can do it. And in some cases, no disrespect to them, but in many cases, I thought, I think my material is better. And I think I might even be better on stage than them. But I didn't have a book and I didn't have a business. And I left that conference thinking, if I am ever going to do this, I need to write a book. So for the next year or so, I was determined to write my book. And I would start, and for a few weeks, I'd be writing, and then I would just lose my momentum and lose the enthusiasm. And then I would just ignore it for a month or two. And then I'd pick it back up and I'd have enthusiasm and motivation again, and then it would just fall apart again. Somehow I was introduced to, or I came across a publishing coach. And again, I'm sure your listeners are going to see a trend here. I found a publishing coach, I want to say in roughly February of March of 2019. But he said, Chris, he said, if you do everything I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it, your book will be published as an Amazon #1 best-selling new release in 2 months or less. Now, I wasn't sure I believed him, but I desperately wanted to.
Yes.
And Pam, I wrote him a big fat check on April 22nd, 2019. The reason I remember the day is it's literally my parents' anniversary, as it turns out. April 22nd, I wrote him a very large check. By the way, I had the support of my wife. When he was trying to close me on this, I said, well, I need you to talk to my wife, because if she's not bought in, this isn't going to happen. She was completely and totally on board. I published the book 1 day short of 2 months later, June 21st, 2019, which was my dad's birthday. And it was released as a #1 best-selling new release on Amazon.
Excellent.
Exactly what he said would happen.
This is unbelievable. Somebody predicting the future because they know the trade so well.
Yeah. I mean, he knew the pattern. He knew the process. He had a process. I followed it. And what's interesting, Pamela, and I've said this countless times, when I published my book, no one knew me from Adam. I mean, I literally had a little book launch event, and I managed to gather about 30 friends and family and former colleagues in a little event venue. I think I did a Facebook Live, and my mom was on the Facebook Live, and a few friends, And I still hadn't launched the business yet. But about 5 months, and I remember lying in bed that night saying to my wife, the day of the launch, I said, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I am so satisfied knowing that I've published the book and the stuff that's been swarming around my head for the past decade is at least in print and
Yes.
it's out there.
Yes.
And whatever happens from here does not matter. This was the goal. And we'll just see where it goes from here. About 5 months later, I got a message on LinkedIn from a gentleman whom I now know pretty well named Steve Bullington. He was one of the gentlemen or one of the individuals who runs the onboarding program for Salesforce. He reached out to me and said, hey, Chris, we discovered your book. Love your book. It's going to become required reading for all new hires entering the profession at Salesforce. And oh, by the way, can you ship me 200 books? And it was at that, this was December of 2019. It was at that time when I realized maybe I've actually done something worth doing here. And Pamela, here's another place where my story gets interesting. I launched my business full time, or I went full time with this business in March of 2020, literally weeks before the world shut down.
I
And at
cannot
the
believe
time, I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, but I survived 2020. Things really took off in 2021. And here I am, 2024, a little over 4 years into running business.
Excellent, and congratulations for two things: for having the courage to vet your decision with your partner and get the book done in the right process, and feeling that a sense of fulfillment when the book actually got to the stands.
Yeah.
That is unparalleled, and the way you expressed it feels so real, so authentic. So thank you for trusting our audience with this and sharing your feeling. The second congratulatory note is for getting recognized by large companies and their leaders, calling you in for training and giving you the opportunity to share your book. So that itself is a big milestone, I must say. Now, your book has 6 habits, and I've read the book. I have put it into practice. What would be the 7th habit that sales engineers should cultivate?
It's funny that you ask, and I've had people ask me this before. I think there's probably there's one thing that is, and you know the book, so you may recognize this. There's probably one thing that's notably missing from the book, and that is I don't talk really all about the proof of concept process or the proof of value process or the idea of pursuing an opportunity to the end or to the finish. So I think the final habit might be something around prove or pursue. Because, and again, you know the book quite well. I talk a lot about, the partnership with sales and discovery and preparing for meetings, and then the presentation, the performance, as I like to say itself, right? The demonstration. But there are things that have to happen after, quote, the big demonstration to ensure the success of the deal. And I think that's probably the 7th habit that I might add. Now, that being said, I'm inspired to just share this one other observation. I've had some people come to me and say, well, Chris, I mean, you called it the 6 habits, but your words aren't actually habits. They're just concepts. And my response to that is, actually, you're right. They're not actually habits. Another book idea that I have is to write a book called The Habits Inside the 6 Habits, because I do think there are, like, let's take habit number 1, to partner with our sales counterparts. I think there are some habits of effective sales engineers within that blanket, quote, habit of partnership, such as extend the benefit of the doubt. That's a habit, right? Have an open mind. That's a habit.
Wishing you all the best, because I'm sure whatever you write, since you write it from your heart and with experience, it's going to be a valuable addition to my bookshelf for sure,
Nice
and to
to
many others like me. Wrapping up, I'd like your advice to anyone who wishes to start their own business in training, enablement, any sort of enablement for the go to market teams. Could be account executives, could be sales engineers, could be anything similar, remotely close to what you attempted in any part of the world, given
Yeah.
we are digitally enabled world today.
Yeah.
Before COVID, we were not so much, but I know you deliver trainings across the globe. So I'm sure there are many listeners who might have a passion for training. If somebody wants to launch their own business, two,
Yeah.
three key advices you would give them so that they get off to a good start versus struggling like you did.
Yeah. I have two thoughts. One that is much more, I guess, conceptual or just fundamental, and the other maybe a little bit more tactical. I think the fundamental advice is if you have that burning desire in your belly, if I can use that term, and that's what I had. I had a burning desire in my belly for a long time, almost a decade, and desperately wanted to do this. And there were a number of times where I could have given up that hope. I could have given up that desire to do this. And even though I recognized on a number of occasions and for a number of years that the time wasn't right, and then I attempted and the attempt failed, didn't give up that hope. And in hindsight, and Pamela, you alluded to this, in hindsight, I recognize that every failure, every success, every stop along that journey was an important step in the process. I realize that I've achieved what I've achieved because of each and every lesson that has been learned along the way, the good ones and the difficult ones. So that's my first piece of advice: is don't give up the hope and be patient with yourself, be patient with the process. And just because you attempt and fail, it doesn't mean you should give up that burning desire if you still have it. So that's sort of the fundamental piece of advice. My tactical piece of advice is if you want to start a training business like this, make sure you have clarity on your point of view for whatever profession you want to coach in, whether that's sales, whether that's sales training, maybe it's something completely and totally different. And by way of example, what's my point of view? The 6 habits that I wrote about. And I'll show the little mouse pad that I have. This is the little framework that I created. Once I created a framework and I had a foundation, I had a very finite point of view about this profession, everything else that I have built around that, the book, the training, the workshops, etc., that's the foundation, that's the core. And I think it's absolutely critical for us to have absolute clarity on our point of view.
Passion does fuel us and take us to a certain level, but it's perseverance, resilience, and the never say die attitude that takes you further. Thank you so much, Chris, for being so transparent and authentic on the show. I look forward to the new book that you write.
Thank you so much, Pamela, and congratulations to you on this podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for gracing it.